You may have felt a strange kind of exhaustion lately. It's not a physical tiredness, but something deeper, a quiet, persistent drain that comes from the endless work of being yourself. In our age, we are told to be ourselves, but the pressure to curate that self has never been greater. This feeling, this modern identity crisis, is a silent burden for so many. If you've ever felt a gap between who you are and who you feel you should be, you are not alone. And surprisingly, one of the most comforting guides for finding a path to your authentic self can be found in the turbulent works of a 19th-century Russian novelist, Fyodor Dostoevsky. We live in an age of unprecedented self-documentation. Every day, we are asked to perform ourselves. On Instagram, on LinkedIn, in professional emails, at dinner tables, in text messages that require careful calibration. We curate our lives like museums. We select which moments deserve to be shown, which feelings are acceptable to display, which versions of ourselves are marketable. And beneath this carefully constructed gallery, there is often a person who doesn't quite recognize themselves in their own exhibition. The modern identity crisis is not what our grandparents might have experienced. It is not simply the confusion of adolescence or the questioning that comes with major life transitions. Rather, it is a distinctly contemporary form of fragmentation. We are told simultaneously that we must stand out and fit in. We must be unique yet relatable, authentic yet professional, ambitious yet humble, original yet not so different that we frighten the algorithm or alienate our audience. This paradox, this demand to be everything and nothing at once, creates a peculiar kind of suffering. We search for our true self as if it were a lost object, something stable and waiting to be discovered. But what if the very act of searching, the very demand that we locate and name this self, is what creates our distress? Dostoevsky understood this. He wrote before social media, before personal branding, before the internet made every person a publisher of their own life. And yet, his novels contain some of the most penetrating descriptions of what it feels like to be fragmented, to be divided against oneself, to desperately want to be seen and to desperately want to hide simultaneously. He knew the modern soul before it even existed. He knew it because he understood something fundamental, that the human heart is not a fixed thing. It is a process. It is a dialogue. It is a struggle. Let us begin with one of Dostoevsky's most disturbing and most liberating characters, the underground man from Notes from Underground. Imagine a man who exists at the margins of society. He is clever, educated, but utterly alienated. He is obsessed with being defined, categorized, and, most unbearably, made predictable. He rages against the notion that he could be reduced to a formula, a type, a rational category. He says something that sounds almost absurd at first. I would rather be conscious of suffering than unconscious of happiness. In other words, he would rather be irrational, contradictory, and free than rational, predictable, and content. Why? Because the moment he becomes fully predictable, the moment he can be completely known and categorized, he ceases to be fully human. He becomes a thing, an object, a function. This might sound strange in our modern world, where we seem obsessed with self-knowledge. But Dostoevsky is pointing to something crucial. There is a difference between self-awareness and self-definition. Self-awareness is alive. It breathes. It changes. Self-definition is a prison. Think about what happens to your identity online. An algorithm observes your behavior. It notices what videos you watch, what posts you like, how long you linger on certain images. Within weeks or months, it thinks it knows you. It categorizes you. It predicts what you will do next. And then it shows you more of the same. The algorithm has constructed a fixed version of you, and in doing so, it has trapped you. But the rebellion, the human rebellion, is to be irrational, to click on something that doesn't fit the profile, to surprise yourself, to contradict your own past statements, to refuse to be pinned down. This is not a flaw in human nature. This is what Dostoevsky calls the essence of life itself, the freedom to be contradictory, to be messy, to be fundamentally unpredictable. Our desire to escape definition is not a sign that we haven't found ourselves yet. It is a sign that we are alive. The modern identity crisis often stems from a deep violation of this fundamental freedom. We are asked to define ourselves earlier and more permanently than ever before. Your LinkedIn profile is your professional identity. Your Instagram is your aesthetic identity. Your Twitter is your intellectual identity. And each of these platforms demands consistency. If you post about philosophy on Monday and share a silly meme on Wednesday, followers will be confused. Brands will be concerned. The algorithm will be disrupted. But Dostoevsky whispers something subversive. What if confusion is healthy? What if the gap between your different selves is not a failure to be integrated, but a vital expression of your freedom? The underground man would be horrified by our modern demand for personal branding. He would see it as the ultimate reduction of human complexity, and he would rage against it. And in that rage, he would be pointing us toward something true, that the search for a single, coherent, marketable identity is a betrayal of our own depth. Now let us turn to another of Dostoevsky's profound insights, the concept of the double, the dvojnik. This appears most explicitly in the novella The Double, but it echoes throughout his work. The idea is simple but devastating. We are all divided. We contain a public self and a private self, a self that is seen and a self that remains hidden. In The Double, the protagonist Golyadkin encounters a man who looks exactly like him, his double. At first, this double seems superior. He is more confident, more successful, more socially adept. Golyadkin is fascinated and horrified. He tries to befriend his double, to understand it, to integrate it. But the double is not a separate person to be reconciled with. The double is himself. It is the person he appears to be in the world. And the horror of the novella comes from the recognition that these two selves cannot be reconciled. The distance between them is too great. This is not a pathology. This is the human condition, magnified and made visible. In our modern age, this split has become almost unbearable. Your double is more visible than ever. You can see it on your phone. You can watch it in real time. Your Instagram is your double. It is you, but perfected. It is you, but edited. It is you, but with the boring parts removed and the impressive parts highlighted. It is you, but not quite you. Meanwhile, the real you, the one reading this right now, perhaps sitting in your home in clothes you haven't changed in days, with thoughts and feelings that would never make it to a caption. The real you watches this double and feels a peculiar kind of loneliness. The double gets more likes. The double gets more attention. The double seems to be winning at life. And the real you, sitting behind the screen, feels unseen and increasingly desperate. This gap between the public self and the private self has always existed. Every human who has ever attended a dinner party where they pretended to be happier or more confident than they felt knows this. Every person who has ever smiled at work while feeling broken at home knows this. But what has changed is the permanence and the public nature of the double. Your double is now archived. It is searchable. It is a permanent record of a version of you that may or may not be true at any given moment. And the terrible irony is this: the more effort you put into perfecting your double, the more alienated you become from your real self. The more you curate your image, the less you know who you actually are. Dostoevsky's genius was to show that this split is not something to be ashamed of. It is not a sign that you are inauthentic or dishonest. It is simply what it means to exist in a social world. We all have a self that we present and a self that we conceal. The tragedy comes when the gap becomes too wide, when the concealments become too elaborate, when the performance becomes so exhausting that we forget there is a real person underneath. But here is where Dostoevsky offers a strange comfort. He does not suggest that the solution is to destroy the double and reveal your true self to everyone. That is not the path. Rather, he suggests that the path to peace is to acknowledge both selves with compassion, to stop seeing the private self as something shameful that needs to be hidden, to stop seeing the public self as something corrupt that needs to be exposed, to understand that you are both. You are the person in the mirror and the person on the screen, and that is simply human. Now we turn to one of Dostoevsky's most psychologically penetrating characters, Raskolnikov from Crime and Punishment. On the surface, this is a novel about a crime, but at its heart, it is a novel about the terrible burden of believing that your life must mean something grand, that you must be extraordinary, that your purpose must be large enough to justify your existence. Raskolnikov develops a theory. There are ordinary people and extraordinary people. Ordinary people follow the moral law. They are bound by conscience and convention. But extraordinary people, geniuses, great men, are permitted to transcend these ordinary moralities. They are permitted to commit extraordinary acts, even immoral ones, in service of their extraordinary vision. And so Raskolnikov kills. He murders an old pawnbroker to prove his theory, to prove that he is extraordinary, that he is capable of the superhuman act of murder without the paralysis of conscience. He is driven by a deep need to believe that his life is not ordinary, that his existence must be justified by something grand and unprecedented. But what Dostoevsky shows us is that this need for extraordinary purpose is a form of suffering. Raskolnikov is isolated, feverish, haunted. His need to be exceptional has severed him from simple human connection. He can no longer relate to ordinary people or participate in ordinary life. He is trapped in the exhausting performance of being extraordinary. This resonates deeply with the modern identity crisis. We live in an age of relentless ambition. We are told that we must find our passion, pursue our dreams, change the world. Social media is filled with stories of young people who built empires, who disrupted industries, who became millionaires by the age of 25. The narrative is clear. If you are not building something extraordinary, if you are not leveraging your unique talents to change the world, then your life is ordinary, wasted, unremarkable. This is the Raskolnikov trap, and it creates a specific kind of modern suffering. People exhaust themselves trying to discover their grand purpose. They agonize over whether their career is meaningful enough. They wonder if they are wasting their talents. They compare themselves to the extraordinary people they see on their screens, the entrepreneurs, the influencers, the geniuses, and they feel small, inadequate, ordinary. And ordinariness, in this framework, is a kind of failure. But Dostoevsky is warning us. He is showing us that the pursuit of extraordinary purpose can actually sever us from meaning. It can isolate us. It can poison us. Because meaning, true, sustainable meaning, is not found in grand achievements. It is found in connection, in presence, in the small, daily acts of love and attention that we give to the people around us. Raskolnikov discovers this only at the very end of the novel, after his suffering has broken him. He meets Sonia, a young woman of profound spiritual depth and simple kindness, and through her, he begins to understand that redemption, that meaning, does not come from being extraordinary. It comes from being human, from opening yourself to others, from participating in the ordinary miracles of connection and compassion. Which brings us to perhaps Dostoevsky's most luminous character, Alyosha Karamazov from The Brothers Karamazov. Alyosha is a young man in a world of tormented, ambitious, brilliant, suffering men. His older brothers are driven by intense passions and theories. Ivan is a rationalist, consumed by philosophical doubts. Dmitri is driven by desire and pride. Smerdyakov is consumed by resentment. All of them are searching for truth, for power, for vindication, for escape. But Alyosha is different. He has found something, and yet he is not driven by the desperate need to defend it, or prove it, or convince others of it. He is simply present. He listens. He loves. He does not have a grand theory about life. He does not claim to understand the suffering of the world. He does not pretend to have answers to the great philosophical questions that torment his brothers. But he has something more important. He has the capacity for what Dostoevsky calls active love. This is not passive sentimentality. It is not the kind of love that feels good and costs nothing. Active love is the love that shows up, that listens without judgment, that touches someone with genuine care, that risks being wrong, being misunderstood, being rejected. And what is remarkable is that Alyosha's authenticity does not come from having discovered his true self. It does not come from a grand purpose. It does not come from a coherent identity that he has finally pinned down. It comes from his willingness to love, even in uncertainty, even without answers. Alyosha's path to an authentic self is not a path of self-discovery. It is a path of self-practice. He does not find himself. He practices himself into being, moment by moment, through acts of compassion and attention. This is the alternative that Dostoevsky offers to the modern identity crisis. Not the discovery of a fixed, final, perfect self, but the daily practice of showing up with openness, with care, with presence. Think about what this means for your own fragmentation. You are not one coherent thing. You are a collection of contradictions, moods, desires, and fears. But instead of desperately trying to integrate all of these into a single, coherent identity, what if you simply practiced being present to each moment? What if you showed up with genuine attention to the people in your life? What if you allowed yourself to be surprised by your own reactions, to change your mind, to contradict yourself, to be human? This is not a path to certainty. It is a path to peace. Let us pause here and acknowledge something. If you have been listening to this and feeling a sense of relief, that is not accidental. Dostoevsky offers a strange kind of comfort in the midst of modern chaos, and it is this: your confusion is not a failure. Your contradictions are not a sign that you haven't found yourself yet. Your fragmentation is not a problem to be solved. In fact, the opposite may be true. The pressure to have a fixed identity, to have discovered your purpose, to have integrated all your contradictions into a coherent self, this pressure is what creates suffering. And the relief comes when you finally grant yourself permission to be messy. Think about the moments in your life when you have felt most authentically yourself. Was it when you were performing? When you were trying to be impressive? When you were carefully managing your image? Or was it in moments of genuine connection with someone who didn't need you to be any particular way? When you could be confused and they would listen? When you could be afraid and they would not judge? When you could be yourself, the real self, the messy self, the contradictory self, and you would not be abandoned? This is what Dostoevsky understood. Authenticity is not a state of being. It is a state of relating. You are authentic not when you have finally discovered who you are, but when you are in relationship with someone who allows you to be whoever you are in that moment. And this changes everything about the identity crisis, because it means that the crisis is not primarily about finding yourself. It is about finding or creating spaces where you can be yourself without performing. It is about building relationships and environments where your contradictions are not just tolerated, but welcomed as a sign of your aliveness. The modern world makes this difficult. Social media is not a space where contradiction is welcomed. Professional environments are not spaces where vulnerability is encouraged. We are pushed toward consistency and clarity and certainty. But Dostoevsky reminds us that these are not the highest human values. Aliveness is, depth is, connection is. And these flourish in the presence of contradiction. So what does it mean, practically, to take Dostoevsky's wisdom into your own life? How do we move from understanding these ideas intellectually to actually living them? First, we must befriend what Dostoevsky calls the underground. Remember the underground man? He exists beneath the surface of rational society, full of contradictory impulses, irrational desires, and rebellious feelings. We all have an underground. It is the part of us that does not fit neatly into our public identity. It is the part that has feelings we are not supposed to have, desires we are not supposed to voice, doubts we are not supposed to express. The modern instinct is to suppress the underground, to pretend it does not exist, to curate ourselves so completely that the underground never surfaces. But this creates an exhaustion. It creates a distance from ourselves. It creates the very fragmentation we are trying to escape. What if, instead, we acknowledge the underground with compassion? What if we listen to it without shame? Not to act on every impulse, not to broadcast every contradictory thought, but simply to acknowledge it, to say, yes, I feel this. Yes, I want this. Yes, this part of me exists, and it does not make me a bad person. This is not permission to harm others or to act without ethical consideration, but it is permission to be fully human, to have complexity, to not have to be one thing all the time. Think of it this way: a person who feels no conflicting impulses, who has perfectly integrated desires, who is completely transparent and consistent, such a person would not be virtuous. They would be inhuman. Virtue, real virtue, is the capacity to feel contradictory impulses and to make a conscious choice about which ones to act on. Authenticity is not the elimination of the underground. It is a conscious relationship with it. Second, we must work on closing the gap between our public and private selves, not by destroying one or the other, but by building a bridge of honesty between them. You will always have a public self. This is not corruption. This is human. We necessarily present different versions of ourselves in different contexts. We are one way with our families, another way with colleagues, another way with strangers. This is not inauthentic. It is adaptive. It is social. It is healthy. But what creates suffering is when the distance between these selves becomes too great, when the public self is such a careful construction that it no longer relates to the private self at all, when we feel like we are living a complete fiction. The solution is not radical transparency. You do not need to tell your boss about your deepest fears. You do not need to post your vulnerabilities on social media. Rather, the solution is to close the distance gradually, to find spaces where you can be more honest, to build relationships where there is less performance required, to create pockets of your life where you do not have to curate. This might be a close friend. It might be a therapist. It might be a journal that no one will ever read. It might be a place in nature where you are alone with your thoughts. It might be a creative practice where you can express what you cannot say in words. The point is not to eliminate the public self. The point is to make sure it does not completely colonize your inner world. Make sure that there are spaces where you can be unseen and still be alive, where you can be wrong and not have to defend yourself, where you can change your mind and not have to explain yourself. And here is a strange thing. When you grant yourself permission to have a private life that does not have to be perfect, your public self often becomes more authentic, because you are no longer performing out of desperation. You are no longer trying to convince the world that you are something you are not. You are simply showing up without the crushing need to be impressive. Third, we must redefine what we mean by purpose and meaning. This is crucial to resolving the modern identity crisis. The Raskolnikov model of purpose, the grand, extraordinary achievement, the world-changing innovation, creates suffering because it is unsustainable. Most of our lives are not made up of extraordinary moments. Most of our time is spent in ordinary tasks with ordinary people. If we have decided that only the extraordinary is meaningful, then we have decided that most of our lives are meaningless. And that is a kind of torture. But Dostoevsky offers an alternative through Alyosha. Purpose is not something you discover in a moment of clarity. It is not a destination you arrive at. It is the quality of attention and care you bring to each day. It is the small acts of connection and kindness. It is showing up for the people in your life. It is doing your work with care. It is noticing beauty. It is listening deeply. It is forgiving. It is trying again after you fail. This sounds less grand than the Raskolnikov model, but it is, in fact, far more radical. Because it means that your life is not dependent on success or failure. It is not dependent on whether your grand project comes to fruition. It is dependent on something within your control, the quality of your presence in each moment. Think about the people in your life who have most deeply impacted you. Were they the ones who achieved extraordinary things? Or were they the ones who showed up for you, who listened to you, who treated you with genuine care? Most likely, it was the latter. And yet, these people might not think of themselves as living meaningful lives. They might think they are ordinary. But from the inside of your own heart, they are sacred. This is the reframing that Dostoevsky offers. Not to diminish ambition or the pursuit of excellence, but to expand what we consider meaningful, to recognize that a life devoted to love and presence and attention is as meaningful, perhaps more meaningful, than a life devoted to achievement and recognition. Finally, and most importantly, we must grant ourselves grace. This is perhaps the most radical and most liberating of Dostoevsky's gifts. Grace means this: you are not required to be one coherent thing. You are not required to be perfect. You are not required to have figured everything out. You are not required to be impressive or exceptional or even particularly successful. You are simply required to be human. And being human means being contradictory. It means having feelings that contradict your values. It means believing in something and doubting it at the same time. It means being strong in some moments and fragile in others. It means being right about some things and wrong about many others. It means changing your mind. It means failing. It means continuing anyway. The modern world is remarkably unforgiving of this kind of complexity. We are living in a time of unprecedented judgment. Every inconsistency is noted. Every contradiction is documented. Every failure is permanent. The algorithm remembers. The internet never forgets. And we have internalized this harsh judgment. We have become judges of ourselves. But Dostoevsky whispers something different. What if you could grant yourself the same compassion you would grant a good friend? What if you could say to yourself, I am confused, and that is okay. I am contradictory, and that is human. I have failed, and I will try again. I am not who I thought I was, and that is fine. I am allowed to change. I am allowed to be wrong. I am allowed to be messy. This is not an excuse for harm or cruelty. It is not permission to behave unethically, but it is permission to be imperfect. And this permission is the beginning of peace. Think about how different your life would be if you carried this permission with you. If you could post something on the internet without agonizing over whether it represented your brand accurately. If you could have a conversation without worrying about whether you were being consistent with something you said 6 months ago. If you could pursue a new interest without feeling like you had to explain why you were abandoning an old one. If you could simply be alive and changing and growing, without needing to narrate the entire process to an invisible audience. This freedom, this grace, is what Dostoevsky offers, and it is perhaps his greatest gift to us in this disorienting age. So we have traveled through Dostoevsky's vision of the modern soul. We have encountered the underground man and his rebellion against being defined. We have met Golyatkin and his double, and learned that the split self is not a failure, but a fact of being human. We have seen Raskolnikov's suffering in the pursuit of extraordinary purpose, and we have witnessed Alyosha's quiet redemption through active love. And what emerges from all of this is a strange and beautiful invitation to stop searching so desperately for yourself, to stop trying to construct the perfect identity, to stop performing for an invisible audience, to lay down, for just a moment, the exhausting work of being yourself. Because perhaps the bravest and most authentic thing we can do in our frantic modern world is not to finally find ourselves. Perhaps it is to finally stop searching so desperately. Perhaps it is to lay down the heavy burden of having to be one coherent thing and to grant ourselves the quiet permission to be everything at once, strong and fragile, certain and confused, beautiful and broken. For in the vast, contradictory symphony of the soul, Dostoevsky reminds us, is where our true humanity resides. And that is more than enough. You do not need to have it figured out. You do not need to be exceptional. You do not need to be perfectly consistent or completely transparent. You do not need to have discovered your purpose or integrated all your contradictions. You simply need to show up, to be present, to treat yourself and others with a little more kindness, a little more patience, a little more grace. In a world that demands you be everything, that is the most radical act of authenticity there is. Be well.